The next dictatorship will not have leaders, it will have data. Have you ever wondered what would happen if a government knew exactly what you were going to do before you did it? Not because it predicted you, but because it had already shaped you. Not because it watched your actions, but because it had access to your thoughts before they fully formed in your own mind. This is not a distant fantasy. This is the trajectory we are already on, and the most unsettling part is that the dictatorship being built around us may never need a dictator at all. For most of human history, tyranny had a face. It had a throne, a uniform, a portrait hanging in every office. Power was something you could see, something you could resist, something you could eventually overthrow, because it lived inside a fragile human body that could grow old, make mistakes, or die. It will need something far more elusive and far more permanent. It will need data. To understand why this shift is so dangerous, we must first understand what power actually is. Throughout history, power has always meant the ability to predict and control human behavior. Kings controlled behavior through fear of violence. Religions controlled behavior through promises of salvation and threats of damnation. Modern states controlled behavior through laws, surveillance, and economic incentive. But all of these systems were limited by one crucial factor: the depth of understanding those in power had about the people they ruled. A king could punish rebellion, but he could not predict exactly which subject would rebel next week. A religious institution could shape belief, but it could not read the precise thoughts forming inside a follower's mind. Power, throughout history, was always reactive. It responded to behavior after it happened. Artificial intelligence changes this fundamental equation. For the first time in history, it is becoming possible to understand human beings better than they understand themselves. Algorithms trained on billions of data points, your clicks, your pauses, your searches, your heart rate, your sleep patterns, your conversations, your purchases, your facial microexpressions, can construct a model of you that is more accurate than your own self-perception. You may believe you are a free individual making spontaneous choices, but the system observing you sees the patterns you cannot see. It sees that you always feel anxious on Sunday evenings. It sees that you are more persuadable after you have not slept well. It sees that a particular color, sound, or phrase triggers a 40% higher chance you will make a specific decision. This is not science fiction. Versions of this capability already exist inside advertising algorithms, political micro-targeting systems, and recommendation engines that quietly shape what billions of people see, believe, and desire every single day. Now imagine this capability is not used to sell you shoes or keep you scrolling, but to govern an entire population. Imagine a state that does not need secret police to identify dissidents because it can detect the earliest behavioral signals of dissent before the dissenter themselves is fully aware of their own discontent. Imagine a system that does not need propaganda broadcast to everyone equally because it can craft a uniquely persuasive message for each individual citizen, tailored precisely to their fears, insecurities, and desires. This is the terrifying innovation of data-based authority. It does not rule through brute uniform force. It rules through total personalized understanding. To understand why happiness escapes us, we first have to understand what happiness actually is, biologically speaking. Not a destination, not a trophy, a chemical event. A brief cascade of neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, released in response to specific triggers, and then, almost immediately, withdrawn. This is the first uncomfortable truth. Happiness was never designed to last. It was designed to motivate. Evolution did not care whether our ancestors felt content. Evolution cared only whether they survived long enough to reproduce. A brief surge of pleasure after eating, after mating, after defeating a rival, after finding shelter. These surges existed for one purpose only: to push behavior forward. Not to reward a rival, but to encourage pursuit. Consider the hunter-gatherer who finally brings down prey after days of tracking. For a moment, there is relief. There is satisfaction. But within hours, hunger returns. Within days, the tribe needs to hunt again. Nature did not build a system that says, "You have succeeded, now you may rest in permanent contentment." Nature built a system that says, "You have succeeded, now succeed again or you will not survive the winter." This is what evolutionary thinkers call the hedonic treadmill, and Harari's framing of it cuts deeper than most. He suggests that the entire architecture of human emotion was assembled not for our well-being, but for our genes' replication. We are, in a sense, vehicles. Vehicles whose internal reward systems were calibrated for a world of scarcity, threat, and immediate survival. Not for a world of supermarkets, social media, and central heating. And here lies the second uncomfortable truth. We have changed our environment far faster than evolution can change our biology. The modern human walks through air-conditioned buildings, eats more calories in a day than an entire medieval village consumed in a week, communicates instantly with people on the other side of the planet, and yet carries inside their skull a nervous system built for the African savanna 60,000 years ago. We are, in the most literal sense, ancient minds trying to operate inside an alien civilization of our own making. This mismatch between the world we evolved for and the world we now inhabit is, according to Harari, one of the central sources of modern unhappiness. Our bodies expect scarcity, and we live in abundance. Our minds expect physical threat, and we live in physical safety. Our social instincts expect a tribe of 150 people, and we live among billions, most of them strangers, many of them visible only as curated images on a screen. Think about what this means for something as simple as comparison. For most of human history, a person's measure of success was local. You compared yourself to your neighbors, your village, perhaps your region. If you had enough food, a stable shelter, and the respect of your immediate community, you considered yourself fortunate. Today, through a single device in your pocket, you compare yourself not to a village, but to the entire planet. You see the wealthiest, the most beautiful, the most accomplished individuals on Earth, curated and filtered, presented as an endless stream of evidence that you are falling behind. The ancient brain was never built to process this scale of comparison. It registers each glance at a stranger's success as if that stranger were a rival in your own tribe, someone directly competing with you for resources, status, and survival. Multiply this by the thousands of images consumed daily, and you have a nervous system in a state of constant low-grade alarm, perpetually informed that it is not enough. This brings us to a deeper layer of the question. Harari often argues that human dissatisfaction is not a malfunction. It is the system working exactly as designed. A perpetually dissatisfied organism is a perpetually motivated organism. Contentment, from evolution's perspective, is dangerous. An animal that feels fully satisfied stops striving. It stops hunting, stops building, stops competing. And in a world of scarce resources, an animal that stops striving is an animal that dies. So nature built us to want, always to want. To achieve a goal and within days or even hours begin generating the next desire. The promotion you worked 5 years for delivers a flash of triumph, and then, almost cruelly, a new dissatisfaction emerges. A bigger house, a faster car, a more prestigious title. The treadmill does not stop because you have run far enough. The treadmill does not have a finish line at all. This is why wealth on its own fails to produce lasting happiness. Studies across decades and across cultures show a consistent pattern. Beyond a certain threshold, enough to meet basic needs and a modest cushion of security, additional income produces diminishing emotional returns. The lottery winner, 6 months after the win, often reports a happiness level remarkably close to where they started. The body adapts, the baseline resets. What once felt like unimaginable luxury becomes, with frightening speed, the new normal, and the search for the next high begins again. Harari extends this argument into something even more unsettling. He suggests that humanity's entire historical project, the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, has been driven by an attempt to solve external problems: hunger, disease, violence, and scarcity. And to an extraordinary degree, this project has succeeded. Fewer people today die from famine than from obesity. Fewer people die from war than from suicide. Fewer people die from infectious disease than from the slow erosion of meaning in lives that have run out of obstacles to overcome. This is the paradox at the center of modern existence. We have engineered away the very challenges that once gave our internal reward systems purpose. And in doing so, we have left those systems searching desperately for new threats, new comparisons, new sources of anxiety to latch onto. The mind that evolved to detect danger in the bushes now detects danger in unanswered text messages, in a colleague's tone of voice, in the number of likes beneath a photograph. If our biology will not deliver permanent happiness, what then does Harari propose? This is where his thinking moves from biology into something closer to contemplative philosophy. He draws, somewhat unexpectedly for a historian, on practices like meditation and on philosophical traditions that long predate modern psychology, suggesting that the question itself, how do I become happy, might be malformed. Perhaps happiness was never meant to be a state we arrive at and remain within. Perhaps it was always meant to be understood, observed, and released, rather than chased. Harari often points toward the idea that suffering arises not merely from negative events, but from the mind's relentless craving for experiences to be other than they are. We are not simply unhappy because life is hard. We are unhappy because we are constantly comparing the present moment to an imagined, better alternative, and finding the present wanting. This reframes the entire problem. The issue is not that we lack enough achievements, enough possessions, enough validation. The issue is the mechanism of craving itself. A mechanism so deeply embedded in our evolutionary wiring that it operates beneath conscious awareness, generating dissatisfaction as a default state, regardless of external circumstances. Consider how this plays out across an entire lifetime. In childhood, happiness is promised upon reaching adulthood, upon gaining independence. In early adulthood, happiness is promised upon finding a career, a partner, financial stability. In midlife, happiness is promised upon achieving status, raising successful children, accumulating enough wealth to feel secure. In old age, happiness is promised upon finally having the time and freedom to enjoy what was built. And yet, at each stage, the felt experience of arrival rarely matches the imagined reward. The goalpost quietly and consistently moves. This is not because the goals were wrong. It is because the underlying assumption was wrong. The assumption that happiness is a destination reachable through sufficient external accumulation rather than a fluctuating internal state shaped moment to moment by how the mind relates to experience. Harari's deeper insight, and perhaps the most uncomfortable one, is this. As civilization solves more and more of humanity's external problems, the internal problem becomes more exposed, not less. When you're starving, happiness feels like a luxury you cannot afford to think about. When your survival is secure, happiness becomes the central, unavoidable question of your existence, and you discover, often for the first time, that solving external problems did not solve the internal one. This is why some of the wealthiest, most accomplished individuals in human history report profound emptiness, while some individuals living with very little report deep contentment. It is not that material conditions do not matter at all. They matter enormously when basic needs are unmet. But beyond that threshold, the correlation between external success and internal peace weakens dramatically, sometimes disappearing entirely, sometimes even inverting. There is also a social dimension to this unhappiness. One Harari connects to the structure of modern economies. Capitalism, as a system, depends on perpetual growth, and perpetual growth depends on perpetual desire. An economy built on satisfied, content consumers who feel they already have enough is an economy that stagnates. So entire industries, advertising, social media, entertainment, are engineered, consciously or not, to manufacture dissatisfaction. To convince you that you're incomplete without the next product, the next experience, the next upgrade. This means that modern unhappiness is not simply a personal failing or a biological accident. It is, in part, an economic necessity for the systems we have built. Your contentment is, in a very real sense, bad for business. The algorithms that shape your daily attention are not optimized to make you feel at peace. They are optimized to keep you scrolling, comparing, wanting, returning. And an organism already biologically prone to craving, placed inside a system engineered to amplify that craving, finds itself in a feedback loop almost perfectly designed to prevent lasting satisfaction. Now consider too the role of status. For most of human evolutionary history, status was not a luxury concern. It was directly tied to survival. A higher status individual in a small tribe had better access to food, to mates, to protection. The drive to be respected, admired, ranked above others is not a shallow modern vanity. It is an ancient survival mechanism hardwired into the deepest layers of the brain. The trouble is that in a world of 8 billion people connected through global networks, the hierarchy you are unconsciously measuring yourself against is no longer a tribe of 150. It is, in effect, all of humanity. And no matter how high you climb, there will always, mathematically, be millions of people above you. The ladder Harari describes has no top. It simply extends further than any single human life can climb. This explains a phenomenon that puzzles many successful people. The closer you get to the top of any hierarchy, the more visible the next rung becomes. A regional success now sees national competitors. A national success now sees global ones. The frame of comparison expands precisely in proportion to your achievement, ensuring that the felt distance to enough never actually closes. Harari would say this is not a flaw in your character. It is the predictable output of a status tracking mechanism evolved for small groups now operating inside an infinite arena. There is a particularly cruel twist here. The very technologies designed to connect us, to make information and opportunity universally accessible, have also universalized this comparison trap. A farmer in a remote village centuries ago had no way of knowing how the wealthiest person on the planet lived, and so no occasion to feel inadequate by that standard. Today, a person living modestly but securely can, within seconds, view the mansions, the vacations, the bodies, the relationships of people whose lives represent the most statistically rare outcomes on Earth, and absorb them unconsciously as the baseline against which their own life is measured. The comparison is not just wider, it is engineered to be constant, algorithmically delivered, refreshed every time you unlock your phone. So what, if anything, can be done? Harari does not offer a simple formula, and perhaps that itself is instructive. He resists the language of self-help, the promise of 5 steps to lasting joy. Instead, he points toward awareness as the starting point. Understanding the mechanism is in itself a form of partial liberation. When you recognize that your dissatisfaction after achieving a goal is not evidence that the goal was wrong, but evidence of an ancient biological pattern reasserting itself, you can begin to relate to that dissatisfaction differently, not as truth, but as mechanism. This does not eliminate craving. It is unlikely that craving can be eliminated entirely, given how deeply it is woven into the architecture of a mind built by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. But awareness changes your relationship to craving. Instead of being driven blindly by each new desire, believing that its fulfillment will finally deliver lasting peace, you can observe the desire, acknowledge its evolutionary origin, and choose, with greater clarity, which desires are worth pursuing and which are simply the treadmill running again. There is something almost liberating in this reframing. If happiness was never meant to be a permanent state, then the failure to achieve permanent happiness is not a personal failure at all. It is the expected outcome of being a human being equipped with an ancient nervous system inside a radically modern world. The pressure to be constantly happy, a pressure amplified relentlessly by modern culture, may itself be one of the greatest sources of modern suffering. We are not only unhappy, we are unhappy about being unhappy, layering a second wound on top of the first. This second layer deserves closer attention because it may be the more insidious of the two. A person who simply feels disappointment after a setback is experiencing something ancient, natural, and survivable. But a person who feels disappointment and then judges themselves for failing to be grateful, for failing to manifest the right mindset, for failing to perform the curated contentment that social media has normalized as the expected emotional default, experiences something far heavier. The original feeling becomes tangled with shame. Harari's framework offers a quiet but important correction here. The craving itself is not a personal failure. It is the inheritance of every ancestor who survived long enough to pass on their genes. You did not choose this wiring. You merely received it, the way you receive the shape of your hands or the color of your eyes. Harari's broader body of work suggests something even larger lurking behind this question. As humanity gains increasing power over biology itself, the temptation will grow to simply re-engineer the problem away. Why search for inner peace through difficult philosophical and contemplative work when biotechnology might one day allow us to directly manipulate the brain's reward chemistry? Why wrestle with craving when a future pharmaceutical or genetic intervention could simply dial down the treadmill's intensity? This possibility raises its own unsettling questions. If we engineer away dissatisfaction biologically, do we also engineer away ambition, creativity, the restless dissatisfaction that has driven every scientific discovery, every work of art, every act of exploration throughout human history? Is some measure of unhappiness, paradoxically, the engine of everything we consider civilization's greatest achievements? If so, the question shifts from how do we eliminate suffering to how much suffering is the price of being a creature capable of building, discovering, and striving at all. Consider the artists, scientists, and visionaries whose work shaped entire eras of human progress. Many of them, by their own accounts, were driven not by contentment, but by a persistent, knowing sense that something was missing, unresolved, incomplete. The restlessness that made their lives difficult was often the very same restlessness that produced their greatest contributions. If Harari is right that craving cannot be fully separated from the deepest engines of human achievement, then the dream of a permanently satisfied civilization may also be the dream of a civilization that stops creating, stops questioning, stops reaching beyond what already exists. This does not mean suffering should be glorified or that we should resign ourselves to perpetual dissatisfaction as some kind of noble fate. It means the relationship between craving and creation is more entangled than our culture's simplistic promise of find happiness and everything else will follow allows for. Perhaps the goal is not to eliminate the restless engine, but to redirect it. To aim the same evolutionary hunger that once chased status and resources toward pursuits that, even if they never deliver permanent contentment, at least leave something meaningful in their wake. There is also the question of relationships and how this same mismatch plays out in our connections with one another. For most of human history, social bonds were forged through necessity, proximity, and shared survival. You did not choose your tribe the way modern individuals choose friends and partners from an effectively infinite pool of options. Today, dating applications and social platforms present an endless catalog of potential connections, each one a single swipe away from the next. This abundance, counterintuitively, does not produce more satisfaction. It produces what some researchers call the paradox of choice. When options are infinite, no single choice ever feels final, because something marginally better might always be one swipe away. The ancient brain evolved to commit to a mate within a small available pool, now hesitates inside an ocean of alternatives, perpetually wondering if contentment lies just beyond the next profile. The same applies to friendship and community. Humans evolved within tightly bound groups, where loyalty, mutual obligation, and face-to-face accountability were the threads holding social life together. Today, many people maintain hundreds or even thousands of digital connections, and yet report deeper loneliness than generations who had far fewer but far more substantial relationships. Quantity has expanded, depth has often contracted. And depth, not quantity, appears to be what the ancient social brain actually requires to register genuine belonging. Harari's broader reflections on meaning also touch something many people quietly suspect but rarely articulate: that meaning itself, throughout history, has often been a story we tell ourselves, a narrative imposed on a universe that does not inherently provide one. Religions provided cosmic purpose. Nations provided collective destiny. Ideologies provided historical mission. As these grand narratives have weakened in much of the modern world, replaced by individualism, consumer choice, and the pursuit of personal experience, many people find themselves without a ready-made framework for meaning, left instead to construct one entirely on their own, often without the tools, the time, or the guidance to do so well. The resulting vacuum, Harari suggests, is itself a significant contributor to modern unhappiness. Not too much suffering, but too little structure within which suffering and joy alike can be made sense of. Perhaps this is the closest thing to an answer that honest inquiry can offer. Not a cure for unhappiness, but a reframing of what unhappiness is for. It is not proof that something is wrong with your life. It is proof that you are a biological organism shaped by forces indifferent to your comfort, operating in an environment your ancestors could never have imagined. The dissatisfaction you feel after achieving your goals is not a personal flaw. It is 60,000 years of evolutionary programming still running, still pushing you forward, mistaking modern abundance for ancient scarcity. Knowing this will not make the craving disappear, but it may change how you carry it. Instead of chasing the next achievement, believing it will finally deliver lasting peace, you might begin to notice the pattern itself, the endless cycle of want, attain, adapt, want again. And in that noticing, however brief, however incomplete, something close to freedom becomes possible. Not the freedom of finally having enough, but the freedom of understanding why enough was never the point. There is perhaps a further layer worth sitting with. If happiness cannot be permanently secured through achievement, status, or accumulation, then the question shifts from how do I get more to how do I relate differently to what I already have and to what I inevitably lack. This is not resignation, it is recalibration. It is the slow, difficult work of loosening the grip of a mind that insists satisfaction lies one step further ahead, and learning instead to notice the moments, brief and unremarkable as they may seem, when the craving quiets, even momentarily on its own. Harari himself, in interviews and writings beyond his historical work, has spoken about contemplative practice not as a solution that eliminates suffering, but as a discipline that changes one's relationship to the mind generating that suffering. Observing a thought without immediately obeying it. Noticing a craving without immediately chasing it. Recognizing a comparison without immediately believing it. These are small, unglamorous acts, repeated thousands of times, that together constitute something far closer to durable peace than any single achievement ever could. This is also, perhaps, why so many people who finally reach the summit of conventional success, the wealth, the recognition, the external validation, often turn, almost despite themselves, toward these same contemplative traditions. Having proven decisively that accumulation does not deliver the promised peace, they are left facing the same unanswered question that confronted them before their success, except now without the comforting illusion that more would have solved it. The emptiness at the top of the mountain is not a malfunction. It is the data finally becoming undeniable. So perhaps the question is not why no one is truly happy. Perhaps the better question is why we ever expected permanent happiness to be possible for a species built, quite literally, never to stop wanting. And perhaps in sitting with that question, rather than rushing past it toward the next distraction, the next purchase, the next milestone, we come closer to whatever peace is actually available to creatures like us. Fleeting, partial, and real only in the moments we are willing to notice it. If this exploration resonated with you, sit for a moment before reaching for the next video, the next notification, the next distraction. Notice, if you can, the quiet space between one craving ending and the next one beginning. That space, however brief, may be the closest thing to an answer this question has ever offered.